There you go. Recording in progress. Okay, so we got a few people, and I'll thank you again, Bob. That was a nice gift that you sent. It's all sitting in my porch charging. So
So what do you think of maybe using it for your students to take a look at a complete system?
yeah, I think that's nice. It just gives a good example to say how you can compact all this stuff down into a marketable unit. Plus, we can listen to the weather report all at the same time. So, okay, well, let me go ahead and give the updated news here. I was looking through it. Oregon just passed a 100% renewable energy by 2040 legislation out there, which was interesting. First quarter of 2021, they show that renewables gained to 25.7% of the electric grid, which is up from what normally they say about 20 or 21%, which is the numbers I've heard before. In fact, solar increased compared to a year ago by 26%, and wind increased by 13.5%. So the markets are still growing dramatically. Along that same line, I saw that Consumers Energy, which is the largest utility in Michigan, has announced plans to eliminate all of their coal power plants by 2025, which is 15 years ahead of schedule, which is interesting. What tells me is that they're intending on abandoning some of their assets, assets that wouldn't have been fully depreciated. They're going to go ahead and dump them early because they're just not economical to run.
So Jay, for the base, are they just going to use gas then?
They didn't indicate whether it was going to be gas. My guess is probably heavily on renewables. Michigan, I know, has been putting in a lot of wind right up there on the the lake coasts. So yeah, I find that interesting. I just heard an interesting podcast about why aren't the coal power plants just disappearing totally, because they're just not economical. And there were some numbers there showing that they were essentially running at about $1 billion a year loss, all of over and above what they can charge for the power. So not only is coal 3 times as expensive as solar, but you can't sell it for what it's costing.
Well, two things. One, a lot of the reasons it's expensive is because of the environmental regulations they put on it, but that's neither here nor there. Let's leave that to the side. But as a practical matter, I mean, if you don't have coal or gas, battery's not there yet. Battery's not ready for prime time. Right. What is Michigan going to do at night? I mean, are they planning on having Elon Musk come up with something to save them in between, or?
Well, my guess is, of course, this is one utility up there. They must have, plans for that, whether they're going to deploy massive amounts of battery banks. And that might have to do with the federal ITC for battery alone. I don't know if they've got aqua storage issues, or it may be that they accelerated their gas turbine production, and some of those are coming online before they had anticipated, which would just be a switch from coal to natural gas. Just not sure. One of the things that the utility requires is that you feed in, or not the utility, but FERC, the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, they require that you feed in the low-cost energy first into the grid. So logically, that would say that you would bring in wind and solar because the incremental costs are close to zero. You're not having to, once the system is built. Then it's usually nuclear, I think, is the next one, then gas, then coal. But apparently they have that flexibility within their system. So many times the utilities ignore that law per se. I don't know if it's a law or a ruling or whatever. And but because the utilities are not free market enterprises, they're able to just pass that extra cost on to ratepayers. And I guess
Usually if you
FERC,
get approved, yeah.
yeah, but FERC historically has approved 99% of all utility filings that have come before them. So
I agree, but I used to do a little bit of FERC stuff because we used to have cogeneration in a lot of our plants at our old paper mills.
uh-huh.
And I mean, FERC, I'd say you're correct, but it's kind of like the federal prosecution. 99.9% or 0.1% of people get indicted, but they only bring the cases that they're pretty sure they can bring. I mean,
Right.
You don't go to FERC if you're an energy attorney and not know, what the rules are and take a big chance.
Right.
They're
It's an
very
expensive process,
right, and the people who are doing this by their nature, utility people, are very risk averse. I mean,
yeah, which I think has been part of their problem.
yeah, fair point.
Because you tend to stick with the technologies that you're used to, and to be fair to them, if you're in the utility business and 10 years ago you're faced with the decision, do I go with renewables or do I go with coal or gas?
Mhm.
Well, for 100 years, coal and gas have been doing the trick. Renewables is unproven. So, which would you do?
Yeah, there's no incentive. If they go with renewables, they're not going to get a big profit. They're just going to get cost recovery. So, and if it goes bad, they're going to get blamed.
Yep. And if it does go bad with the fossil fuels, if it turns out to be uneconomical, they can go to FERC and ask for, or to their local PUC and ask for a rate increase, which typically is granted. So the downside risk is just not there, and for all of you free marketers like Don, it would tend towards deregulation. I would imagine, putting words in your mouth, but
I don't mind deregulation at all. But you have to when people actually fail, you have to let them fail.
yeah, I agree. The folks have been very willing to let me fail over the years. I'm willing to let the utilities fail. So, okay, so we'll start to hear more about a technology. I've been reading about it a little bit, called Tandem Solar. So this is a new term that we may begin to hear more and more. It's a new technology in solar panels. It is essentially a perovskite layer, top layer, on top of what they refer to as a direct wafer bottom layer. And apparently, like in wind, there's a thing called the Betz limit, which says you can never extract more than 59% of the energy out of wind because, it's just physically impossible. I mean, there's wind entering into a turbine. It's the motion of the wind that is modified into electricity. And if you extracted 100%, then no air would be leaving the wind turbine, so no air could enter into the wind turbine because it would essentially create a vacuum. So there's a thing called Betz limit. 59% is the best you can do. Well, apparently in solar, the limit, and it has a name, but I forget what it is, has been largely assumed to be 24%. So the theoretical best limitation. So Bill, you're shaking your head no? Is that?
I mean, I think NASA uses modules now that are 40% efficient, but
yeah, those are concentrator. Yeah, what they're doing is concentrating more light onto the surface. So they're increasing the irradiance hitting the cell, not necessarily increasing the efficiency per se, but it does increase the efficiency. But anyway, they're talking about this with silicon.
I thought they deployed just flat panels, and besides, I've seen some charts. Well, it bears clarification. But are you suggesting? Okay, you continue.
Okay, all right. Well, we can do the research on it, but I know there's a limit, and this article said 24%. Maybe it's wrong, but what they're hoping is these tandem solar are they're beginning to push it up to 30%, because apparently that direct wafer bottom layer is extracting from the infrared spectrum. So so that's just interesting. I know that maybe some of what you're thinking about there, Bill, I know the multi-junction panels, where they have multiple layers, and they have been theoretically getting up in the 40% range, but it's different levels. It's like multiple cells stacked on top of each other.
Right.
So it could be that 24% for a single level may be the best. I don't know, but we should look that up. I'll make a note to look that up before the next meeting.
So Jay, is it they're increasing the limit by, as you're saying, increasing the spectrum that they can access, kind of like, so the waste amount is now being used, kind of like I forget what it's called, but a combined turbine. I forget what they were for in normal gas generation or power generation. They use the waste heat to run another turbine.
Yeah, combined. They do call it
Combined
what?
cycle, I think.
Combined cycle or heat and power. So yeah, I guess what they're basically saying is, of course, there's a large spectrum in sunlight. We're only harvesting the visible light spectrum. So apparently they're expanding that out into the infrared through that second layer, which then gets you more efficiency from sunlight.
So it's kind of like the combiners, but instead of increasing the amount of normal sunlight being concentrated onto the panel, it's increasing the spectrum so that for whatever wavelength, you're probably still getting the same efficiency, but you're getting more wavelengths. Is that a proper way of looking at it?
Well, I don't know if I'd say it that way exactly, because what we say is that within sunlight, there's 1,000, watts per square meter of power.
Okay.
And we're only extracting a portion of it because we're only harvesting from a portion of the spectrum.
Okay, gotcha.
If we extend out that spectrum, we can harvest more power.
Okay,
So,
gotcha. I mean, so that the limit in the standard normal sunlight approach is that because we only get X% of the spectrum, that's why we only get 24% or whatever the number is efficiency. Yeah. Out of that same denominator, we're getting a bigger percentage in the numerator to give us a higher percentage.
We're able to harvest from a bigger chunk of the pie. So
okay, but the efficiency probably is similar from the additional spectrum as it was for the other spectrum, I'm guessing.
I would assume, okay. Yeah. I don't know that we need to know that other than we're getting.
No, it's like knowing why the engine runs instead of just turn the key. I get that. Yeah.
Now that, of course, infrared, if we can harvest well from infrared there is some available. Well, no, I'm thinking beyond infrared. So let's see, if we can go beyond the infrared, we could harvest at night. And they are talking a lot about nighttime panels now. But they operate on a different way. They're kind of doing the exchange, because of the differential between the colder nighttime temperatures and the heat of the panel. I'm not really clear on how it works.
Like a Stirling engine or something?
Pardon?
Kind of like a Stirling engine, you're just getting a temperature differential, it's generating power?
Yeah, but it may be a temperature differentiation in deep space. I don't want to say, I don't know enough. Whatever I say is going to be wrong, but I know that they do talk about temperature differential. So it's not necessarily the same kind of thing it's like the panel goes in reverse, instead of harvesting.
Radiation is temperature to the fourth power. And I think that's what you're alluding to.
Okay. All right.
Heat transfer via radiation.
Yeah, because I was thinking they were, when I first read about it, and the only reason I even remember that is because I was thinking they were beginning to harvest some of the, cosmic radiation type things, the even further on the spectrum beyond infrared into X-rays and gamma rays and things like that. Because I know they could do that. I saw one of those collectors at the, what do they call it? The very large telescope thing that's out in New Mexico when I stopped there, that was in the movie Contact, where they have all those satellite dishes in a big circle. So they're able to do that. Now, if we can go the opposite direction and harvest ultraviolet, then we can begin not to have to worry about cloud cover, which would be interesting. So we'll have to see what kind of projections happen there. But I suspect these are the kind of things we're going to be seeing over and over in the coming years, as it becomes financially viable. Let's see. There was a note that Amazon is now the largest corporate buyer of solar in the world. They're projecting 100% of their energy needs from solar by 2025, which is 5 years ahead of their schedule. And I saw there was an interesting article. It was very sort of well hidden, and it caught my eye because it was a new legislation proposed by Kathy Castor. And I only noticed it because we know Kathy Castor from when we lived down in Florida. And she was the daughter of a friend of ours, Betty Castor, who was in politics at the time. She's introduced a bill called the Efficient Grid Interconnection Act. And this could have some significant impact. What they're saying essentially is they want to revamp the way the transport section of the utility grid is managed and financed. So the analogy they used is currently, if you want to add more capacity to the system, you have to either pay for the additional capacity or demonstrate a way that it can be obtained. And they were arguing, saying that it was similar to every new car entering a crowded highway. The new car had to pay for all of the infrastructure costs of expanding the highway in order to accommodate it. From a utility perspective, I can see the logic of it. We're transporting X number of electrons. If you want yours to be on here, you're going to have to fund the added capacity. But that tends to then diminish the amount of new systems that could come online in an already congested system. And those new systems are largely going to be renewable. So it would tend to retard the addition of renewable sources. So they're seeking to have that equitably shared, whatever that means. Yeah, Don?
Are you saying the consumers themselves have to be the ones who are justified? I missed.
No, I'm looking at it. I think it's probably the generators.
Okay.
If you're already, let's say you've got a coal power plant, and the system is geared up to handle your coal power plant, and then somebody wants to add a wind farm in Iowa, then the new wind farm in the current system would have to say, all right, we've got to pay for this extra transmission capacity. What this is saying is, no, it needs to be shared over all the people who are using that line. Now, if I were the coal power plant, I'd be a bit miffed.
Yeah, because they already paid for it.
Yeah, just because you want to join my party, doesn't mean I have to suddenly pay for your fee, or at least a portion of it. Which, but again, I guess that depends on your perspective. So you can be sure it's going to screw somebody. That's just the way legislation works. So
Jay, may I ask a question?
Sure, go ahead.
This legislator that proposed this, is she still a Florida legislator?
Yeah, she's in the Tampa Bay area.
Okay. I just make that question because I know that as a Florida resident myself, that it's a very vertically integrated power system. So you get some, like in Iowa, probably, where the generators are quote unquote competitive and the transmission is quote unquote regulated. In Florida, both and that kind of, the cost sharing of the generators is in an Iowa, somebody probably other than the utility company. But in Florida, it's all typically one and the same, as the generators and the transmission is all vertically integrated under the utility.
Yeah, although she is a U.S. Congress person, so it is a national bill that's being proposed. But my guess is it's a pro renewable energy bill. it's there to facilitate the addition of renewable onto the transport line. That's
Interesting.
my assumption. So,
Interesting.
but I'm sure it's going to hit a lot of resistance by entrenched forces and may go nowhere. But I just thought it was worthy of mentioning. And when we talk about, again, we've talked about on the grid before, there's generation, there's transmission, and there's distribution. And we've always focused on generation, but generation is starting to be pushed out into a distributed model. With household, with rooftop, with commercial, with power purchase agreements, with all of these kind of things. And distribution is still and will be for a foreseeable future probably pretty highly regulated because it is a monopolistic type venture.
Right, kind of a thing where we're all better off if it's monopolistic.
Yeah, probably so. Although they may have to open up access to their distribution to other players, but they will still, they'll be able to charge a fair market rate for that. Similarly to what happened in telecom. But transportation is kind of going to be the wild, wild west. That's the internet backbone of the grid. And I suspect you're going to see a lot of players, trying to build these big pipelines. And that's their sole business, selling on the market. So I don't know where that's going, but we have seen a move with utilities transferring more and more of the proportion of their bill costs to transportation. And I don't know why they're doing that. Maybe they're trying to make some of their other areas look a little bit more profitable, or maybe that is where the cost allocation should be. I guess we'll find out. Don, I'm sure will have some sort of comment on that, right? when you look up about the transportation issue.
I don't know. I'm neutral.
Okay, all right. You're a transportation agnostic, so.
Probably.
Okay. All right. So did anybody have any technical issues? Anything that you wanted addressed?
I'd like to ask a question. I don't know why, but I'm sharing my screen with an irradiance meter. I'm surprised that I don't have one. It measures the the watts per square meter coming in, and I was wondering whether anybody has used one, has any recommendations, comments, what have you. These are reasonably priced, $50, but it just so happens from AliExpress the delivery is a month off. Anybody got any comments?
I do, but yeah, the one that's like the second one there looks very similar to one that I used to use, that I still use. Yeah, that one. I found it worked quite nicely. I did get a $400 one that's a lot more bells and whistles that you can attach to the panel, and it's got a temperature probe that you can attach to it as well. And I found I didn't like that one at all because it was too complicated. It had too many options. This one, you just sort of point at the sun and push a button, and it tells you what the irradiance is.
I see.
So,
the question arises, MPPT obviously optimizes the amount of power coming harvested, and you wonder whether these have that feature. That is, it's not enough to measure the VOC and ISC, and I wonder, whether it compensates for, to give you a better reading.
What I've used them for, and I haven't heard, other than curiosity to just see, what is the irradiance, but when you're doing the commissioning, if you take your, let's say this phone is the panel, you can take your meter and put it at the same angle right next to it to see what is the irradiance hitting that panel. But then you also have to take a temperature reading at the back of the panel, and then you adjust your voltage based on actual temperature against standard test conditions, and you adjust your amperage for, irradiance versus 1,000 watts per square meter. And then you can see, is my inverter outputting at what it should be outputting under these current conditions? And that's just kind of a sanity check to see, because often you'll have put in let's say a 4 kW system or a 10 kW system, but your inverter's not outputting 10 kW. It's outputting something like 6,000, say. Well, is that right? Based on the conditions that you're faced at the moment, or is something screwed up? Is something not connected? So that's what you're doing there. But it's also fun to bring out when you got Cub Scout troops, walking around saying, look how much sunlight there is. Look at the power in the sky,
Absolutely.
Yeah, we also like to get a multimeter and let them hold it. When they hold hands, the voltage changes, that's kind of, because you can get a voltage reading off their bodies, people love that, so.
I once built a plexiglass coffee table that had the shape of an electric outlet. And I put a little telephone generator underneath it. And I would get a circle of 10 people all holding hands and just turn the generator a little bit and everybody would, ah!
You could have said it was coming from the spirit world. Okay, anybody else have any technical questions?
Jay, I've got one. That article that was on your on the solar website the other day, I saw you commented on it with the batteries being put on the panels.
Oh, yeah.
I had a question about that. I mean, I understand mechanically what they're doing, but they were like 1 kilowatt hour batteries. From a practical perspective, what are they trying to do? Because it was commercially motivated. Was it like peak shaving or something, or what's the?
Well, yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that, because I did tune into a battery webinar this week, and it was really quite interesting, because batteries, at least at the retail market or at the residential market, is huge at the moment, because the price per kilowatt hour is coming way down. It's going to hit about $100 a kilowatt hour at the moment, and as the sales guy said, the price is $100 per kilowatt hour to the manufacturer, but to the consumer, it's still at about $1,000 a kilowatt hour. And those other $900 are primarily soft costs. So that was something that has to come down a lot. But what you're getting at there, what Don's referencing is there's a new product, I don't remember who made it, but instead of installing a battery bank, you install a small battery like a microinverter under each panel. So every panel gets connected to its own battery, its own microinverter, and everything is up there under the panel. So it's a click, click, click kind of thing. So if you have 20 panels, you got 20 batteries. There are some advantages to that, obviously, the same like you get with microinverters, where no single point of failure, installation is easy. You don't have to figure out a place to store any of this. There's, no venting, all of that. The disadvantages, of course, is the per unit cost going to severely exceed the cost of a centralized system. And the big one that I know I commented with you, Don, was, heat and cold. This thing's right up there in the middle of a solar panel. Batteries are susceptible to both heat and cold. So is that going to be a problem? But one thing they mentioned in the seminar is with the 2023 code, all batteries must be stored outdoors. So apparently that's already a done deal with the 2023 code. So the batteries are going to be outside regardless. So whether you put them on the roof or you put them on the side of the house, that's going to remain an issue. And it's a big deal because it didn't sound like, at least from this seminar, that these code officials thought very much of our northern climates. They're in California, they're in Arizona, they're in Florida, whatever. And the current technology of batteries tend to stop working at they said about minus 10 degrees Celsius, which is what, right around 0 Fahrenheit, somewhere in that neighborhood. And so that's not an uncommon temperature. So essentially what would happen with a system like that, at least with current technology, is your battery backup system would just stop working when it got real cold. And is that a viable solution? So then I'm sure people will begin to work on heated casings or new technology that's less susceptible to the cold. I'm sure that will be a fix at some point, but I don't quite know how they're going to react to that. So did that answer what you were looking for, Don, or no?
Well, I think it did to some extent, but I was kind of wondering as far as a practical use of the batteries, this was targeted for, mid-level, less than utility, but more than residential size is what I understood to be their target market. And it didn't seem like a whole lot of power generation, like to keep them all through the night. And I assume they're on the grid. So is this just for like peak shaving? What's the economic impetus to get these?
Yeah, well, I'm sure that, of course, it's the same as any residential situation. Yeah, in the seminar, they said that basically in California today, 40% of all installs are incorporating batteries, and that's residential installs. Now, nationwide, 20% of all installs are now incorporating batteries. A couple of years ago, it was almost 0. So I think it's pretty much three things that you're looking at. Time of use pricing, that's one. So in those areas where you have different pricing structures for different time of use, being able to shift your load by a couple of hours can be a big deal. So that's it. But a lot of these major markets are experiencing some severe grid instability, like the wildfires in California, the winter storm in Texas. So people are beginning to look at it as a UPS kind of situation for resiliency. So that's one. And I think there are some situations where the utilities will not let you net meter. So at that point, harvesting your own excess solar and then using it on site is an issue. And then, as you mentioned, for the commercial side, demand charges is a huge issue where you want to do your peak shaving, where you cut that 15-minute increment where you're using the most power during the month and essentially fund that from your battery bank. So as the cost of batteries come down, I think we'll see it integrated into almost every system, regardless of size. In fact, even on our system at home, we're starting to look at how do we incorporate the battery bank into our little residential. Even though we've got a reliable grid, my assumption is that grid will not be reliable forever. So we have to have some sort of resiliency built in. In fact, I was listening to another podcast. You guys must think I do nothing but listen to podcasts or webinars or whatever. But this was about the Texas power outage. And Bill, I know you're down in Texas. Apparently, they came within about an hour of the entire grid collapsing. And they estimated it would be a 4-month process to reestablish power within the state of Texas.
It was 4 minutes and 37 seconds.
4 minutes and 37 seconds. Yeah, so you were watching, right? You had your watch going. But they said that the main thing, they said the main thing that saved it was solar coming back online, which produced a lot of power for the other utilities, because each of these utility centers requires a power source for them to function. They're not entirely self-sufficient, and the power had to come from somewhere. And solar came to the rescue. Yeah, Bob.
Okay. Solargraph had the head of Enphase in. I don't know if you had a chance to catch that, but on their 8 and 8 plus versions, which were coming out, they have a new factor where if you lose grid power it continues to send electricity to your outlets in your home.
Yeah. You
And-
mean, it's got like the old, oh shoot, there was one of those string inverters that allowed essentially a single circuit. Is that sort of how that works?
Well, whatever you are hooked up to, it just powers at 110 volts
Okay.
into your panel.
But they'd have to have some sort of relay to disconnect from the grid.
Yes, they do, and I understand it's an electronic relay, which they do, and they have to do it within like 4 nanoseconds or something like that.
Yeah. Yeah, I know they've got that unit that you can buy, like, because I've been looking, because we have N-phase inverters, and it seems like I've got to put in a transfer switch, which is an independent module,
Right.
and then a battery bank. So you're saying the new ones can function even without a battery bank?
Right, exactly. But
Okay.
even if you have a battery bank, think about it. If you lose power and it's daylight out, you can pull off of your panels and not take off of your batteries. And then when your light goes down, then you can start pulling off the batteries, which is going to extend your availability of power for the house.
Yeah, what the batteries have done in that situation, though, in the past, and it sounds like the 8s and 8 pluses may get by that, is it sends a grid emulation signal to the inverters to convince them that the grid is still functioning, even though it's not.
Exactly.
So now you don't need that little battery bank. Because I was just going to put a small battery bank, as small as could be, just for that purpose. Because if I can get through the day, if we have a month-long, I can get through the night without power or with just a small amount of power. That's not a problem. But if every day I could refreeze my freezer and I could redo my refrigerator, at least you can get through an extended emergency. So,
Right.
so yeah,
But
that's
you would have to definitely have a new combiner box with a new processor and software and everything else like that to provide for this. But I thought it was a great idea that they can do that.
Uh-huh. Yeah, speaking of N-phase, I just commissioned an N-phase system the other day, and it's the first time I used that combiner box. I know you've used that before, Bob, but it was interesting. I mean, they've gone to the total phone app process of doing your software stuff, which I find annoying because I find the phone too small. I need to have big meaty fingers on a keyboard or something. But anyway, it was pretty smooth. It was pretty easy. The Envoy system, the communication is built right into the box. So you just push a little button in there and it sets up the AP signal, whatever AP stands for. You link into your phone as if it's a Wi-Fi address, and then you're off to the races, detecting each of your microinverters, detecting your Envoy, all of those kind of things. So it was pretty clean.
Yeah, I had an interesting situation that we came up with. I could squeak by with a 40 amp breaker going into my switch panel. Except one sunny day, it decided to go over 40 amp and trip the breaker. And at that point, unless you're looking up on the phone to see what the output is on that thing, what it does is that the backfeed of the 220 back to the N-phase combiner box shuts it off. So that panel goes completely dead.
Yeah.
So, and that shuts down any production completely. So when that happened, I lost all production. And I had it, and every time you lose power, you got to bring up, go through that process you were talking about putting it back onto the N-phase app. And
you have to like rediscover each of your inverters. Well, that would be a pain in the butt.
well, it's a little simpler than that, but it does it automatically. But you have to go through the process of connecting to the Wi-Fi and all of that process on your phone and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah.
it was a pain.
I like their old system, but you know, I don't know. I liked old versions of software as well. So, you know,
Hey, Jay, this is Ed Kirkpatrick. I got
Yeah.
a question about the batteries.
sure.
If you're running with the lithium iron phosphate batteries, why would they have to be in or outside?
I think it's mostly, you know, my impression again, and this is just an impression, is that the public has a lot of concern after the, you know, EV cars and cell phones, you know, the internet videos of these things going into runaway. So it's probably more a PR thing than a real safety concern.
Yeah, and that's not really a problem with the lithium iron phosphate batteries. And not only that, but if they're going to say that, then you can't park your electric car inside your garage.
Yeah, well, that who knows, but you know, because really there was a greater safety issue with the lead acid batteries being in your house with
Yeah.
hydrogen outgassing and things of that nature. Lithium ion is a much safer technology, but this guy was very, very firm saying it's a done deal in the 2023 code. All batteries must be outside the structure.
Early on,
It may also be because they're moving to a higher voltage, and that could be just something they couldn't overcome because they used to limit voltages at 50 volts, you know, within a structure, within a residential structure.
Yeah.
But a lot of these are coming in at, you know, 1,000 volts, 2,000 volts, and they must have decided, you know, it's just too great a safety risk to have that kind of high voltage equipment inside a residential environment.
Oh, okay.
in the early days of lithium ion, you know, if you short them out, they explode on you.
Yeah, well, they have that
They-
thermal runaway. Yeah.
Yeah, and they had isocling between the cathode and anode inside, and they would short out all by themselves and explode. But that was in the early days. I think they had some resolutions in it.
Yeah, most of them that I've seen require a fairly catastrophic physical damage to the battery before thermal runaway becomes an issue. And that, you know, is unless you live in a, you know, unless something physically happens within your building, you know, a wall collapsing or something, I wouldn't think that's an issue. But who knows? But it's something we're going to live with, you know, if it really is a done deal. So it certainly makes install a lot easier. You don't have to bring them right inside. But my big concern is if you're sticking a big Tesla, you know, power wall outside and you just spent $8,000 for this battery, what's to keep somebody from walking up and walking off with it? You know, you've got an $8,000 piece of equipment just sitting out there next to your living room window. You know,
About
so
1,000 pounds. About 1,000 pounds.
the current ones are 270 pounds, I think. So two guys who are very ambitious could definitely run off with that thing. So, but if you're getting batteries that are, you know, like microinverters where each one only weighs a kilogram or so, you know, of course that would take you 20 different, you know, wrenches, but I don't know. I don't know how we're going to protect the equipment. I think that's going to be a big issue as more people are aware of the value.
Jay, as a practical matter, are you going to have to build a shed if you want a lead acid battery bank?
If you want lead acid outside,
Yeah.
yeah. I mean, I would do an underground earth berm kind of situation. That would be the ideal because it's going to keep it cool. It's going to keep it warm, you know, relatively. Sort of keeps it in the sweet spot for a lead acid battery. You know,
But that
right at
raises-
60 degrees is perfect.
Yeah, but that raises the cost a lot above putting it in the basement.
Yeah, it sure does. Yeah. Yep. Put it in your, you know, 1950s fallout shelter. You know, that's a good place for it.
Purposes?
Plus, then you have power for when you go down there, you know, to survive the zombie apocalypse.
There
So-
you go.
Yep. Okay, so I was going to touch on the well, first, does anyone else have any technical before I really quickly touch on the technology bill? Okay, so yeah, I have a lot of research on it, but I'm only going to hit the highlights. And some of you guys may not be aware that earlier this month, the federal government passed a $250 billion technology bill, which we heard a lot about the original Recovery Act bill, or I forget what they called it, but when they spent about $1 trillion. Well, this is about $250 billion, in addition to the upcoming infrastructure bill that they've been talking about. And it sort of flew through with bipartisan support, which is interesting, and which normally tells me that there's probably a lot of pork in it, you know, because both parties like those things. So, and as long as you make your corporate donors happy, everybody's happy. But the two big takeaways I saw is they're freaking out. You know, it sort of was like the mindset of Washington, D.C. The first thing they're freaking out about is that companies can't get microchips. And apparently microchips, they're realizing, are the lubricant of our economy at the moment. And we have offshored almost all production of microchips off to China, Korea, Taiwan. I think those were the big three countries. And as an example, like the typical automobile has about 1,000 microchips in it today. And it's in everything. They're just in everything. And they've realized that, like, it sort of struck me a little like the Arab oil embargo back in the 1970s, where a small group of nations can essentially shut down an economy through an embargo, should they so choose. And the microchip embargo is the one that, at least in our current economy, could be the weak spot, because it goes across all aspects of our economy. And we're suffering through a little bit of that right now because of COVID. But I think they're saying, hey, we need to bring a lot of this back on shore. So we're going to invest literally billions of dollars into the microchip industry to shore up the resiliency of that. So that, I would say, is about 1/3 of the bill. And another 1/3 of the bill was robotics and automation. So my takeaway on this is that the US government is thinking that robotics is the next big industry, you know, and I know we've heard this in certain aspects, but I think they're saying in order for us to be competitive 20 years from now, America has to own the automation industry, or at least hopefully not make the same mistakes of innovating and then offshoring. So that's part of their motivation there, which sort of goes counter to the whole idea of jobs, because about 50% of all of the industrial jobs of today will be eliminated through this automation process. Now, to be sure, there will be a lot of jobs created in the new automation industry, but my interpretation of this is, once again, high school level jobs are being eliminated and replaced with college level jobs. You know, to be a high earner in tomorrow's society, you got to have an education. And that's just the bottom line. You know, you can't just go work at the Ford plant after you finish high school anymore and expect to make a good living. So, and they're pouring a lot of money into the technical and trade schools, because, like, I'm sitting here at Zane State, they have a good EET program here, electrical technician. No, it's a electronic engineering and electrical technician, I think is what the EET stands for. And I know the controls portion of that is something that companies are just coming and pulling people out of class and hiring them if they can deal with control mechanisms. And so I suspect that's going to be a big, so when I'm saying college educated, I'm not really saying you got to have a 4-year degree and a master's in, electrical engineering, but you'll need to have some technical training for this. Yeah, Bob, you got a comment?
Yes. I've witnessed this since 1980. I was around and watching everything go offshore since then, and it's just gotten more and more. Today, to maintain jobs, I have friends who are moving. First of all, if you're into writing, programming, you're going out to the East Coast, Oregon and stuff like that.
You mean West Coast?
West Coast too. So to maintain jobs today, we're in an international economy, you got to be mobile. And I got a lot of friends who moved to China, working for Motorola out there. And you have to have a suitcase today to maintain your occupation. And it's a worldwide type of market now. It's no longer national or statewide.
Yep. Well, that was another aspect of this bill as well, is to create, localized enterprise. I don't quite know the right term. I was going to say enterprise zone, but that has its own connotations. But kind of Silicon Valleys scattered across the country. And of course, this is a favorite of all legislators because everybody's going to be the next Silicon Valley. But my guess is this was to get it through a bunch of the senators who have political power. We're going to set up a zone in your region, but we'll see if it works. I think that would be great. And they also redefined STEM in the education world to incorporate renewables and climate change technologies, which seems like a minor issue, but it's a big deal when it comes to funding for different programs. So we're going to see in a lot of community colleges a lot more solar training, a lot more wind training, because it falls under the STEM programs from this point forward. And a lot of money for research. Yeah.
They weren't before. I'm kind of surprised that climate change is one thing, but I mean, solar, wind, the rest of that seems like engineering.
Yeah, you would think, but I can't, it's funny. I was just trying to list the ETA programs, and I know Ed's there at ETA, but when Ohio has where these things fall in their certification, and there's no classification anywhere where solar fits easily in their current classification. They don't currently consider it. They usually throw it into building trades. So it's hard to know where it fits in their models. It's very localized.
If you go to EV, you'll find renewables under mechanical, engineering. I think it's mechanical in particular, but it's definitely in the engineering area. That just seems odd that they wouldn't classify it that way.
Yeah, and of course here at Zane State, it's listed in the electronics program, which makes a certain amount of sense. Although they also had solar thermal listed in the electronics program as well, which makes no sense at all. But solar is solar apparently. So anyway, this is a big hairy deal. It's going to change a lot. I mean, $250 billion is a lot of money that's just been allocated, and it's going to have a major impact on us. I just found it curious that nobody was raising it, or I haven't heard the media per se talking much about it. So
I'm excited now for my part, hearing that.
Okay, well, good. And if we get this other technology bill coming through, this infrastructure bill, we'll wait and see how that plays itself out.
Does that mean you can ask for a raise now?
No, it doesn't trickle. That's trickle down economics. That never works. So no, I don't know. And I'm of course and a couple of different minds. I sometimes try and put myself in the mindset of the politicians dealing with this, because in the early days of this technology or the infrastructure stimulus, there was a lot of talk about we need to revive the economy through this government spending, and it's a danger going too small, not too big. But now it seems that the economy is pretty robust, at least in isolated areas. And if I were a politician, I would be more receptive to a pared down stimulus bill, maybe more so than I would have been 3 months ago. I guess that's where. So I don't know. That's neither here nor there, has nothing to do with solar, other than if I hear that instead of $1 trillion infrastructure, it's only $500 billion, I'm not going to care one way or the other, really. So none of the money's coming to me anyway, Bob, as you point out. So I guess I'm so, and they're probably not going to fix the potholes on our street anyway. So once again. All right, well, we're coming to the end of the hour. Anybody have any closing questions, comments? Well, good.
Hey, Jay, this is Ed again. I'm at the Makerspace here in Greencastle with Chris Hebb. And what we'd like to do is maybe sit down sometime with you, since we got this grant for putting in a solar system here at the Makerspace, and go over that with you at some point in time and talk about our options.
Okay.
And maybe some of the people that we could contact there at Alt-E. I know we've worked with a number of people there at ETA, and we'd like to get somebody who's going to help us out. So I just wanted to bring that up with you. And
All right, could you give me a call right after this call? Let me give you my cell number. Yeah, it's 740.
oh, hold on a minute.
Stop recording yet, Jay?
Yeah, I'm still recording, but people are gonna call anyway. What the hell?
Yes. Okay.
Yeah, 740-252-6038.
Got it. All right.
Okay. All right. Well, I'll see you guys
Thanks.
all next week, and I'll talk to you just real soon, Ed.
All right.